Have you ever looked into a woman's eyes and felt something stir? Not lust, not even love, but a strange, ancient ache. An ache that wasn't yours, but hers. Like a silent hunger she's never named. Carl Jung might tell you that what you saw in that moment was not her ego, not her social mask, but a brief flicker of her anima, her inner emotional compass, the side she often buries beneath survival, performance, and expectation. It wasn't flirtation you witnessed. It was the psyche reaching out for wholeness. And that is the beginning of a truth many men sense, but few dare to face. Female desire is not what we think it is. And when you begin to see it clearly, it will shatter everything you thought you knew. Because female desire does not scream, it whispers. It is not loud, but subterranean. It coils beneath layers of duty, of politeness, of smiles that are trained responses rather than soul expressions. Women have learned to dress their longing in irony, to hide their erotic soul in efficiency. And yet, when she wants, truly wants, it is not just for flesh or touch. It is for recognition, for spiritual collapse, for a man who can see her, not her body, but the mythology behind it. Jung wrote that the unconscious seeks compensation for the unlived life. And in women, this unlived life often emerges in the form of unspoken yearning, for surrender without shame, for intimacy without fear of annihilation. What she craves, in the quiet, is to be undone, without being erased. She wants to melt, but not disappear. She wants to give in, but only to something worthy of her hidden world. Not the man who conquers, but the man who listens without speaking, who holds presence like a mirror, who allows her to fall without trying to catch her. And yet, how often is her desire reduced to image, to angles, to algorithms? What should be sacred is staged. The gaze that should have been devotional becomes dissecting. Desire becomes consumption. But Jung warned us, when a woman's anima is ignored, it begins to distort. The feminine soul becomes shadowed, and in shadow she does not stop desiring. She begins manipulating, not out of malice, but out of fear. She will flirt, not to connect, but to survive. She will seduce, not to open her heart, but to reclaim control. Because when a woman has learned that her worth lies in how she's seen, not how she feels, then her desire becomes a performance. And no performance, no matter how beautiful, can satisfy the soul. In truth, what she truly desires, what the anima truly aches for, is rest. Not laziness, but rest from vigilance. Rest from being the caretaker, the controller, the perpetual emotional leader. She longs to collapse without being punished, to cry without being judged, to be wild without being shamed. And this is the wound no one speaks about. For so many women, desire has become dangerous, not because of others, but because of herself. She is terrified of what she might lose if she truly opens, because every time she has paid, with her trust, her energy, her sense of self. And so, the feminine impulse retreats into strategy. She becomes hyper-capable, emotionally intelligent, and endlessly giving. But underneath the competence is a desperate plea. Will someone see me, not as a function, but as a soul? Jung saw this as the psychic split between persona and shadow. A woman's persona might be confident, loving, and sexually open, but beneath it could live a shattered girl who never learned to receive without consequence. And this is what makes female desire so complicated. It does not emerge from safety, but from paradox. She desires most when she feels safest, yet safety makes her bored. She wants to be led, but fears losing power. She wants to surrender, but only to someone who can meet her, not devour her. And if a man doesn't understand this paradox, he misreads everything. He'll think her withdrawal is rejection, her testing is disinterested, her coldness is disapproval, when in truth many times it is grief. Grief that comes from lifetimes, yes, generations, of having to suppress the very flame that makes her alive. The feminine is not linear. It flows. It crashes. It rises in waves. And if she senses that her depth will not be held, she will never show it. This is why so many women choose men who are emotionally distant. It's not because they want pain. It's because those men give them something familiar, emotional starvation. And if that's the diet you were raised on, then nourishment feels alien. Intimacy feels threatening. True presence feels unbearable, because it forces her to face the one thing she has avoided all her life: being fully seen, fully felt, and therefore fully vulnerable. Jung would argue that this avoidance is not conscious. It is a defense mechanism of the psyche. He said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, and in the case of female desire, the neurosis often looks like overfunctioning. She becomes everything to everyone except herself. Her desire is sublimated into caretaking. Her sexuality becomes service. Her fire is hidden beneath layers of emotional labor. And in the quiet of her room, she wonders why no one ever asks what she wants. The truth is, she doesn't know either, because she was never taught to ask. She was taught to please, to adapt, to soften, to soothe. And so when her desire does arise, it terrifies her, because it doesn't speak the language she was raised in. It doesn't ask for compromise. It demands surrender. It demands truth. It demands a connection not made of conditions, but of raw, energetic honesty. And that kind of connection feels dangerous to someone who has lived in performance for most of her life. But it is in that danger that her true desire lives. Not in the clothes, not in the chase, but in the man who can look into her soul and say, "You don't have to pretend anymore." That is the moment the anima awakens. And when she awakens, she is not seductive. She is sacred. She is chaotic and soft, radiant and grieving, open and terrified all at once. She wants to be known, but only by someone who has known his darkness first, because a woman's true desire will never be given to a man who is afraid of hers. So what does she want? Not a man who solves her, not a man who owns her, but a man who can stay still in the storm of her becoming, a man who does not try to fix her tears, but honors them, a man who does not reduce her to sweetness or sexiness, but who knows that her body is not an object. It is a doorway, and walking through that doorway means encountering all the parts of her that have never been loved, not even by herself. This is why intimacy is terrifying for her, because in every touch, every kiss, she's asking a question she cannot speak aloud. Will you leave when you see all of me? That is the hurt beneath the heat. That is the ache behind the arousal. And if a man cannot answer that question with presence, then no amount of technique, status, or sweetness will ever matter. Because to truly touch her body, you must first touch her absence, the parts of her that were silenced, betrayed, forgotten. You must enter not as a conqueror, but as a witness. Because female desire, when it is real, is not just erotic, it is existential. Desire, for the woman who has lived too long in performance, is not a hunger for flesh. It is a longing to finally stop performing. And that longing terrifies her more than loneliness. Because once she drops the mask, who will remain? Who is she beneath the pleasing, the seduction, the charm? That question lives at the center of her unconscious, and few dare to face it. Not because it is complex, but because it is painful. Because in the heart of every woman who craves love is a wound she never dared to name, the fear that she is unlovable when she stops being useful. Carl Jung would say, "This is the moment where the shadow begins to speak. And when it does, it doesn't speak in words. It moves through her body, through instinct, through contradiction. She might reject you not because she doesn't want you, but because she doesn't trust herself to be wanted. She might crave closeness, yet pull away when you come near. And if you take it personally, you miss the point. Because what's happening is not between two people. It's between her and her fragmented self. You're not just touching her body, you're touching her history. The moments she silenced herself, the nights she cried without anyone noticing, the relationships where she gave everything and still wasn't enough. You're touching the trauma of being wanted only in parts, never in wholeness. And it is in this raw, invisible space that the true terrain of female desire begins, not in the body, but in the soul that's been starving for years. She does not want to be fixed. She does not even want to be understood. She wants to be felt. Felt without pressure. Felt without judgment. Felt as she is, not as who she's learned to become. And that requires a presence so deep it becomes stillness. A stillness that doesn't flinch when she shifts. that doesn't punish when she erupts, that doesn't shrink when she reveals her fire. Because for the feminine soul, safety is not made of words, it's made of energy. You either hold it or you don't. And this is where most men fail, not in strength, but in stillness. They try to lead her without ever having met their anima, their own inner feminine. They want submission without giving presence. They want openness without offering depth. But you cannot receive the sacred if you approach it with strategy. And Jung was clear about this. What you seek outside of you is often the part of you you've never accepted. So if you crave the feminine, but fear her chaos, chances are you've disowned your own, because the anima is not gentle. She is not always soft. She will burn you alive if you only show up halfway. She wants your totality, your presence, your grief, your clarity, your silence. She wants the part of you that isn't trying to win her, that isn't seducing, that isn't managing. She wants the you who can hold her gaze without needing to be told you're enough. This is why she tests. Not because she wants to control you, but because she wants to feel you. Are you still there when she shifts? Do you vanish when she's not agreeable? Can you still love her when she's not pleasing you? These are not games. These are questions from the unconscious. And if you fail the test, she withdraws, not to punish, but to protect herself. Because for her, opening again means risking collapse. Many women have carried relationships like burdens. They've carried emotional labor, spiritual direction, and sexual performance, all while suppressing their own needs. And so desire, for her, is rarely simple. It comes tied to guilt, to shame, to the fear of being too much. And unless you've done your shadow work, you'll confuse that complexity for manipulation. You'll label her crazy, moody, unstable, when in reality, she's just expressing a depth that the modern world has never made space for. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The same is true for female desire. If she doesn't awaken to her own emotional needs, her body will speak in ways her mind cannot interpret. She'll chase unavailable men. She'll confuse chemistry with connection. She'll perform intimacy while starving for authenticity. And none of it will make sense until she stops blaming men and begins listening to the silence inside her. But here's the brutal truth. Even when she starts to awaken, the loneliness doesn't disappear. It deepens. Because now she sees what she used to tolerate. She feels what she used to numb. And the men who once excited her now seem hollow. The conversations feel empty. The touch feels disconnected. And in this space of transition, she often wonders, will anyone ever truly meet me here? And this perhaps is the most painful part. Because to desire as a woman in her truth is to walk a lonely road. A road where attention no longer satisfies, where performance feels exhausting, where desire becomes a mirror, not of what she wants, but of what she's no longer willing to endure. The casual, the convenient, the emotionally absent, the spiritually indifferent, all of it becomes unbearable. She begins to crave something sacred, not just love, not just sex, but reverence. The kind of love that doesn't shrink in silence. The kind of touch that doesn't awaken insecurity. The kind of presence that makes her feel more like herself, not less. And that kind of desire, real, rooted, raw, is terrifying to both men and women because it cannot be manipulated. It cannot be performed. It cannot be faked. It demands realness. And realness, as Jung would say, is the death of the persona. In that sacred death, her anima rises. Not the domesticated woman, not the sexual fantasy, not the girlfriend, but the deep feminine, the archetype, the inner priestess, the part of her that does not bend for validation, that does not chase, that does not fear solitude. She desires, but she does not beg. She opens, but she does not abandon herself. She surrenders, but only to what aligns with her soul. And that is what makes her dangerous in the most beautiful way. Not because she will harm you, but because she will no longer harm herself for you. She will walk away when your presence is absent. She will smile, not to please, but to express. She will love without losing herself. And if you are not ready for that, she will not explain it. She will simply vanish, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Because the woman who has met her anima no longer negotiates with energy that drains her. Her desire becomes precise. Not transactional, not conditional, but discerning. She no longer asks, "Will you love me?" She asks, "Can you meet me where I already am?" And most cannot. Not because they're bad, but because they've never met their depths. To desire her now, you must be awake. Not perfect, not polished, but present. You must have faced your inner child, your shame, your hunger to be chosen. Because the woman who has reclaimed her desire is not interested in fixing men. She is not interested in raising boys in the bodies of grown men. She wants to build, not rescue. She wants to grow, not babysit. She is no longer available for unconscious longing. She is building a temple, and only those who understand sacredness will be invited in. And that is why this truth hurts so deeply, because it means that if you are not in alignment with your soul, you will never be able to hold hers. What no one tells you about a woman's desire, real desire, is that it doesn't begin in her body. It begins in her silence, in the places where she buried herself so deeply that even she forgot where she hid the key. She may laugh, she may flirt, she may even sleep beside you, but until that silence is heard, she has not let you in. Because female desire is not loud. It waits. It waits for safety, for spiritual resonance, for a mirror that doesn't distort her image. And when that mirror appears, something ancient stirs in her, something beyond romance, beyond fantasy. It is the anima awakening, and once awakened, it cannot go back to sleep. But awakening is not blissful, it's brutal, because it reveals every moment she faked pleasure, every time she nodded instead of saying no, every time she stayed when she wanted to run, every time she had sex when she needed love. And Jung knew, what the soul refuses to express consciously, it will manifest unconsciously. And that's what makes female desire so dangerous. Not because it's evil, but because when suppressed, it mutates. It begins to sabotage. She stops knowing what she wants. Or worse, she wants what hurts. That's why many women become addicted to emotional chaos. Not because they enjoy pain, but because pain is familiar. Because the desire that comes from abandonment is confused with passion. And so, she keeps chasing ghosts, men who don't stay, men who don't see her, men who mirror the absence she lived through in childhood. And still, she calls it love. But it's not. It's a reenactment. It's the psyche replaying trauma, trying to rewrite the ending. And it never works. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For many women, that includes accepting the part of them that desired just to feel needed, the part that used seduction as a defense mechanism, the part that chose lovers who felt like home, but only because home was chaotic. To face that truth is to grieve, to mourn the years of unconscious giving, to mourn the performances mistaken for intimacy, to mourn the loss of self in the name of love. But from that grief, something sacred can be born. A new relationship with desire, a new way of loving that does not cost her her soul. And that is where her anima becomes not a wound, but a compass that doesn't point toward approval, but toward alignment, toward depth, toward presence, toward a man who doesn't need to be begged to see her, but who sees her simply because he has seen himself. Because only a man who has made peace with his anima can honor hers. Only a man who has met his shame can cradle hers without flinching. Only a man who has sat with his silence can listen to hers without running. And when that kind of man arrives, she does not perform, she does not seduce, she simply softens, not for him, but for herself, because her nervous system finally says, "I can breathe." That is the moment desire transforms. It ceases to be a hunger. It becomes an offering, not of her body, but of her being. And that offering is not transactional. It is not conditional. It is not interested in games. It is an invitation to co-create, to build not a relationship of roles, but of souls, where polarity is not based on dominance, but on presence, where surrender is not weakness, but wisdom. But here's what no one wants to admit. Most men are not ready for that, because most men still see desire as conquest. They want access, not intimacy. They want bodies, not burdens. They want her joy, but not her grief. her sensuality, but not her history. And so they ask her to open, but only selectively. And that, Jung would say, is the danger of the unconscious masculine. It wants the fruit without planting the roots. It wants the sacred, but only if it's convenient. And the woman who has met her soul will not consent to that. She may go through seasons of loneliness. She may long. She may ache. But she will not settle. Not because she is cold, but because she is clear. She knows now that intimacy without presence is just trauma in a prettier costume. That sex without depth is a trade, her softness for his ego. And she is no longer selling. That's what hurts the most. To carry this clarity and still live in a world where most people want connection without cost, where presence has been replaced by attention, where desire is confused with dopamine. But this pain is not a punishment. It's a purification. And it is through this purification that she begins to embody what Jung called the integrated feminine, where the anima is no longer a projection, but a presence, alive, embodied, discerning. She no longer asks, "Am I lovable?" She asks, "Is this love aligned with who I've become?" That one question changes everything, because now she walks with her rhythm. She dresses not to seduce, but to express. She speaks not to impress, but to reveal. She no longer competes for male attention, because she knows that her desire is not a currency, it's a compass. It points her toward what expands her, and away from what drains her. And that compass, it's sensitive. It feels more than words. It reads silence more than promises. It knows when a man is posturing, when he is charming without presence, confident without consciousness. And it turns away, not out of superiority, but out of survival. Because her soul has already been too close to what looked like love, but felt like abandonment. And so she waits, not passively, not impatiently, but with clarity. She lives fully. She creates. She builds. She dances. She weeps. She loves herself back to wholeness. And from that wholeness, she chooses. Not desperately, not recklessly, but with intention. Because when a woman has met her anima, she doesn't chase. She attracts. Not with manipulation. Not with tactics, but with truth. And if you cannot meet her there, she will not follow you. She will not convince you. She will not shrink from being palatable. She will simply keep walking toward herself. And that is the most beautiful heartbreak you'll ever witness. To realize you touched her body, but never reached her soul. That she offered you a doorway, and you chose distraction. That her desire was not complicated. It was just too honest for a man still addicted to illusion. So now, the choice is yours. Will you become the kind of man who can hold what is sacred? Will you face your anima so you can truly meet hers? Or will you continue to collect bodies while your soul stays starved? The truth is this: you cannot fake presence. You cannot memorize depth. And you cannot awaken a woman who's already done the work. You must rise to meet her. Because her desire, it's not a game, it's a prayer. And if you're not the answer to that prayer, she will not beg. She will let you go, with tears, with grace, and with the quiet knowing that one day when you're ready, you'll remember the fire in her eyes and realize it wasn't seduction. It was a mirror. And you looked away. If something in this message stirred your soul, don't ignore it. Maybe it wasn't just about her. Maybe it was about you. The parts of you that still fear depth, still chase safety and performance, still mistake attention for connection. But now you know. And once you know, you can't return to sleep. So ask yourself, are you ready to stop pretending and start becoming? Are you ready to love in a way that doesn't cost your integrity, your stillness, your soul? Because the anima doesn't wait forever, and neither does she. If this message revealed something you've always felt, but never had words for, drop it in the comments. Let it be seen. Let your truth breathe. And if you know someone, man or woman, who's still searching for love in all the wrong mirrors, share this with them. Wake them gently, or let them wake you. Subscribe if you're ready to stop chasing shadows and start walking toward the fire. Not just to feel loved, but to finally feel real.